Welcome to the Rime Buddhist Center's Dharma Talk podcast, Achieving Peace Through Compassion. This podcast is a recording of the Dharma Talks given during our Sunday service.
Thank you all for being here. Today, the topic of my Dharma Talk is this precious human life. And I have seen this described before as this precious and rare human life. And I really like that version because it gets at an aspect of why human life is precious, is because it's rare. And the Buddha used to describe it as human life is so rare that it's like if there's a yolk in the ocean and a turtle comes up to the surface, it hitting that yolk in the ocean, if it's presumably not trying to. I don't know what a yolk is, and I don't need to. The point is, it's like really rare. We might think of a needle in a haystack or something, but that times 100. So if we can learn to think that human life is rare, then maybe we can be more motivated to think, what's the best way to live our lives? How can we not waste our life? Because it's rare. And sometimes human life really doesn't seem that rare to us. We have to really think about it sometimes, at least I do, because when you go to like Costco, when I go to Costco, I don't think human life is rare. I think, oh my gosh, there's so many people here, right? And insert your example there, but we can all think of examples of that. But we have to really think about it because it's said that there are more flies on a pond than there are human beings on planet Earth. More flies on a pond. And I don't know if that's true, but that gets said. But one thing that I do know is true that we've learned from science now is that, and this is gross, we have microorganisms on us and inside us. And we have, in fact, each of us so many that it's way more than the amount of people in the world. Okay? So in that way, if you were picking random life forms, you would not pick a person very often because there's so much life in the world. And we just happen to be here instead of being flies, right? And so in that way, we're lucky to be here because what we don't have is animals have the suffering of dullness and bewilderment. They don't have the same ability we do to practice meditation, to study, to grow. They don't have all the same abilities we do. So in that way, we're lucky to be here. The Dzogchen master Longchenpa described our lives as human, and I quote, human form endowed with precious freedom and advantages. And we can think of that. We can think about that sometimes. We have freedoms and advantages, and we aren't always taking advantage of those. We can study and practice. We have access to teachings to better ourselves, right? We, in fact, have access to all sorts of knowledge. If we want to learn about anything, we probably can figure out how, because also we live in the modern world, right? And we have an ability to grow. But from a Buddhist perspective, a very important thing we have is we have the ability to understand suffering and its causes. And because we have that ability, we can have the ability to learn how to manage our suffering and hopefully in some ways transcend our suffering. And I like to also add, when I'm thinking about this precious human life and how we're lucky to be here, I like to also add that I feel really fortunate to live in the modern world. And by that, I mean, I have running water in my house, right? I can take a hot shower every day. My food, I don't have to worry about it being unclean that much, right? And I have a flushable toilet, right? I have all these things that I take for granted. And in the distant past, people didn't have those. And actually, in the world today, very sadly, some people don't have running water. And that's a thing that still exists, and we can tend to forget that. So in that way also, I feel lucky to have this life. And then I think, well, how do I want to live my life? So I'm going to read to you real quick from The Power of Mind, Khentrul Lodrote's book. I'm going to read to you just what he says about freedoms and advantages. Okay, so he says, and I quote, To have freedom means that we have not been born into a state of existence in which there is no opportunity to practice. States where there are no freedoms include being born into the animal or hungry ghost realms. Many of these states of existence are characterized by so much suffering or such intense ignorance that beings cannot even consider searching for a spiritual path, let alone practicing one. If we were born into one of those states, we would not have the freedom to understand a teaching that explains the causes for happiness or how to find an end to suffering. We would be unable to practice such teachings. We need a proper physical support to understand the teachings and to apply them in practice. To be born human and to have the leisure to practice means we possess certain freedoms. To have advantages means that we have circumstances in our lives that enable us to search for an authentic path and to accomplish it. These advantages include where we are born, our mental faculties, and the general conditions of our lives. When we have the necessary circumstances in our lives, we have the advantage of being able to practice. If we're reading this book or hearing this talk, for example, you already have certain freedoms and advantages. The majority of us don't think about what it means to be human, nor do we consider the true potential for human life. If we don't appreciate the freedoms and advantages that we have, then we won't use them fully. It is important to think carefully about the choices we make. So we can really reflect and think, how do I want to live my life? And I'm going to tell you about, there's this, gosh, I hope this isn't silly. I saw this t-shirt when I was a kid, and I remember it very well because it really stuck with me, because we don't expect to see wisdom on a t-shirt. And this shirt said on it, "He who dies with the most toys still dies." And so I think about that sometimes. I'm, not to brag, I'm Generation X, I'm 43 years old. So a lot of things targeted to people in my age group, somehow advertisers decided we wanted cool, edgy things. So t-shirts with slogans like that. But a toy, of course, toys can be anything. It doesn't have to be literally toys, but it can be whatever things we're chasing after all the time it doesn't always serve us to chase things. And I think there's a certain amount of comfort we need in order to be happy. But after that, I think there's a ceiling on our happiness. So I like to, I think about the world's richest man got divorced, right? The world's richest man got divorced. What does that tell me about his happiness? And not only did he do that, but he got so bored, he started building rockets and going to space. And my favorite thing about that thing I just said is there are two different men I could be talking about there, because there's two different world's richest men that got divorced and built rockets. How does that happen, right? So chasing wealth all the time, as those guys did, it didn't make them happy enough to not do those things. So do we need more than chasing things all the time? And I think we do. I'm reminded of a quote from the philosopher, the notorious B.I.G., who said, and I quote, "It's like the more money we come across, the more problems we see." It's like the more money we come across, the more problems we see. And I think that that really means something to me. I used to have apartment problems, like I need my air conditioning fixed and it takes them forever to come get to it or whatever. And now I have a house, so I have house problems. So I had to buy a furnace. And I had, like this morning, my wife and I were in bed today and we heard this sound. And I asked her, "Is that a woodpecker?" Because a woodpecker is pecking my house. And so we're going to figure out how to deal with that. I don't know. But I'm going to read to you another passage from another book now. This is called Finding Rest in the Nature of the Mind by Longchenpa. He's a Dzogchen master. And this passage I'm going to read to you sort of describes how I feel about myself right now. And maybe it will be relatable to you too. Okay, so this is what Longchenpa says. And I quote, "There are those not entering the doctrine whose actions are a mixture of good and ill. Thinking of this life alone, they're utterly distracted by their busy occupations. Rough, untamed, they cast away all thoughts of lives to come. They do not strive for freedom, though the Dharma they may hear. Their state is not supreme, but mediocre. To some slight good they may at times incline. More often their mind's sight is veiled by negativity. They have the semblance of practitioners, and yet what good do they achieve for others or themselves? Whether they assume the guise of monks or laity, they are a little higher than the beings in the lower realms, and so the conqueror described them as superior. I'm not really crazy about it when the Buddha is referred to as the conqueror, but that's what he's talking about. But it's we're trying to conquer ourselves and our own weaknesses, of course. So not supreme, but mediocre. That's how I feel a lot of the time. We're all trying our best, though. But he goes on to say something more aspirational, where I want to try to be. And he says, and I quote, "Beings who are utterly sublime are vessels for the stainless Dharma. Through learning and reflection, they attain its essence. They discipline themselves, and others they establish in the virtuous life. Their practice, like the king of mountains, is unshakable. They are the ensigns of the sage's victory. Householders are better. Those who have gone forth to homelessness, the teacher has declared them both to have a precious human form." That gone forth to homelessness, that means monks and nuns. So Longchenpa's saying you have precious human life, whether you are living in a house, having a family, raising kids or whatever, or if you go live as a monk. Either way, precious human life is there, and we should strive to not waste our lives. So I think the message that I want to give is that we are missing our potential. We are missing our potential. We are chasing things that don't bring lasting happiness, and we are making enemies out of the world sometimes and getting pulled around by our disturbing emotions, greed, hatred, and delusion. The way we get pulled around by those is where something happens and then you just react to it. So if one of my children is being annoying and I just react and I yell at them right away, right? That's what I want to not do. I want to rather decide how I'm going to respond to things. Decide instead of just those snap actions that happen. People get in fights because they just react too fast and they don't think about it. And the thing is also, we're sort of sleepwalking through life sometimes. We miss things, and that's because we're not very mindful. So I think of like when somebody says, "I can't believe my daughter's driving. It feels like she was just in diapers." Well, it's because we're missing out on, and that's me. Someone saying that is me. And we're missing out on things because we're sleepwalking through life. And when you're pulled around by disturbing emotions, and when you're chasing after accumulating things all the time, and when you're sleepwalking through life, you know what? Not only are you not happy, but also it's really easy for people to sell you stuff. It's really easy for people to sell, and the people that sell you stuff, they know that, right? And selling you stuff, that can be not just selling you things, but selling you ideas too, right? So in that way, this stuff can be really empowering to us. It can be really empowering to us to know I have precious human life. I want to step into my power. I want to decide how I want to live. And we don't want to waste our lives. So I submit to you that the best way to live our lives, or a better way anyway, is to work on connecting with others and growing as a person and spreading compassion. And there's a story about the Buddha that I really like to tell when I can get it into talks like this. So I'm going to tell it now because I really like it. But the Buddha, he had this assistant named Ananda, who was his cousin. And he was the person that spent the most time with the Buddha. And one day he goes to the Buddha and he says, "Hey, I think community, connecting with other people is so important that it's like half the spiritual life." And the Buddha says, no, it's the whole thing. It's the whole way. Sangha is the most important thing. Community is the whole way. So I think happiness is found by pursuing our potential and learning how to put down some of our emotional baggage and not letting our disturbing emotions control us. These things, they get in our way. So I think we can work to unleash our potential, and we can learn to live in a way that's more meaningful and positive, and we can build connection connections with others and cultivate more wisdom and compassion and just spread love everywhere. We can do that. We just have to really want it. So what I want to suggest is for the next week, just reflect on the precious freedoms and advantages that human life offers you, because we all could have been born in different circumstances, right? And the traditional Buddhist teaching is that you are where you are because of rebirth, because the causes were created by some aspect of you in former lives. And some people really struggle with that teaching, and that's okay, because for this, it doesn't matter that much. Do we want to live the best possible life because we earned this opportunity and we want to make sure we seize it? Or did we get this opportunity for no reason? Either way, we should seize this human life and we should live the best way we can. So for the next week, I want you to just reflect on the advantages you have that other beings do not have, because we are lucky to be here. We are so lucky to be here. And I hope this talk's been helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Rime Buddhist Center's Dharma Talk podcast. Music was provided by Barefoot Brand Music. Please consider supporting the Rime Buddhist Center by making a donation at our website at www.rimecenter.org/donate.